Welcome. I'm Ava Gabrielle Wise, and welcome from the Southeast Crescent Regional Commission and U.S. Endowment for Forestry and Communities. And thank you for joining us for the Building Resilience, Wealth Creation, and Regional Readiness for a Federal Commission in the South. This conversation has been one that has been a long time coming, and so I'm glad that you were able to join us. For a quick overview, can everyone hear me? Let me just make sure before I get started. Can you all hear me? Thumbs up? Great, great. Um, let's just give a quick overview of the Southeast Crescent Regional Commission. The Southeast Crescent Regional Commission was created in 2008. It was designed to make strategic investments in economic development to move distressed counties into economic resilience. The commitment to see a federal commission in the Southeast U.S. spans several decades. For almost as long as the standard bearer, the Appalachian Regional Commission, has existed. Many of you are familiar with the Appalachian Regional Commission. It receives about $165 million a year, but it has done some phenomenal things in the 50 plus years that it has been in existence. It has been credited with playing a vital role in reducing poverty, for example, in that region over the time that it has existed by almost 50%. It built a massive regional highway system, the Appalachian Development Highway System, that effectively connected that region. It was one of the first priorities because it was designed to effectively connect that region, that formerly geographically isolated region, to the rest of the commerce and trade of the country. And it has counties that exist in the footprint of the Appalachian Regional Commission are also known to grow at a faster rate than counties that are not in that commission. So it has done a lot of great work in the region, which is why this conversation has remained so important to those of us who live in the Southeast region of the United States. By comparison, however, the Southeast Crescent Regional Commission, though it was created in 2008, was authorized about $30 million, but only about 250,000 of that was actually appropriated. And as no federal co-chair was ever appointed, the commission has remained inactive, and the $250,000 has just rolled over each year. So in late 2020, some of us and some of you who are joining us got together and sent a letter to then President-elect Joseph Biden's transition team asking that he appoint a federal co-chair to the Southeast Crescent Regional Commission early in his administration. And while that appointment has not yet been made, of course, there are a lot of things going on right now. So the appointment has not yet been made, but Congress, we believe, gave us a nod by increasing the $250,000 appropriation to $1 million in the most recent federal budget. And so we are hopeful that this is a nod in our direction, that they are paying attention to this issue. So let's talk about today. Today we have some of the most highly esteemed voices on Black Belt and rural development in the country on this panel, and I am so happy to have them join us. In the interest of time, I'm going to introduce them one by one as we meet them to hear from them. But I just want to point out that we are so grateful to have their voices joining us today to share and shed light on this issue. Alita Rogers, who is the program manager, Alita, raise your hand, is the program manager at U.S. Endowment of Forestry and Communities, is our tech support for today. She's kind of substituting as tech support for us today. And so she is going to be posting polling questions and things. We want this process to be as interactive as possible. There is so much diversity and professional experience among our audience members. I was so proud to see those of you who registered as we went forward. that it would be a lost opportunity for us not to draw upon your expertise as well along the way. If you're not muted, I'd ask if everyone would mute your microphones so that the speakers can be heard as we move forward. So as Alita, post the questions and the polling questions for you to respond. Please respond. We want to hear from you. And if you want to share who you are as you're responding, please feel free to do so. We have the polling questions defaulted to anonymous, so you don't have to, but we would love to still hear from you nonetheless. So in late 2020, some of us and some of you who are joining us got together and sent a letter to then President-elect Joseph Biden's transition team asking that he appoint a federal co-chair to the Southeast Crescent Regional Commission early in his administration. And while that appointment has not yet been made, of course, there are a lot of things going on right now. So the appointment has not yet been made, but Congress, we believe, gave us a nod by increasing the $250,000 appropriation to $1 million in the most recent federal budget. And so we are hopeful that this is a nod in our direction, that they are paying attention to this issue. So let's talk about today. Today we have some of the most highly esteemed voices on Black Belt and rural development in the country on this panel, and I am so happy to have them join us. In the interest of time, I'm going to introduce them one by one as we meet them to hear from them. But I just want to point out that we are so grateful to have their voices joining us today to share and shed light on this issue. Alita Rogers, who is the program manager, Alita, raise your hand, is the program manager at U.S. Endowment of Forestry and Communities, is our tech support for today. She's kind of substituting as tech support for us today. And so she is going to be posting polling questions and things. We want this process to be as interactive as possible. There is so much diversity and professional experience among our audience members. I was so proud to see those of you who registered as we went forward. That it would be a lost opportunity for us not to draw upon your expertise as well along the way. If you're not muted, I'd ask if everyone would mute your microphones so that the speakers can be heard as we move forward. So as Alita, post the questions and the polling questions for you to respond. Please respond. We want to hear from you. And if you want to share who you are as you're responding, please feel free to do so. We have the polling questions defaulted to anonymous, so you don't have to, but we would love to still hear from you nonetheless. So we're going to start with our first panelist, and I'm so glad she's able to join us. If Alita can help us by changing her name from Alita's name to Tamara's name so you know who she is, that would be helpful. But I have known Dr. Tamara Holmes for some years, and when I say that, you will find no one else who's more committed to investing in capacity in local rural communities, as well as investing in resources in local communities so that communities have the ability to self-direct and kind of set their own course in community and economic development. She meets that standard. She got a promotion a couple years ago, and I was sad. I was happy for her, sad for us. She's now the Deputy Director of the Office of Broadband at the Virginia Department of Housing and Community Development. In this capacity, though, she is going to be speaking in her role as the program manager for the Appalachian Regional Commission. And so, Dr. Holmes, thank you for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you, Ava.
Where is she? She disappeared. I can't see her. Oh, she's over there. Okay. Thank you for joining us. So I'm going to start with a question. So the way today is set up, We are going to have what often you would probably call a lightning round of questions. I have more than one, so it'll probably be kind of like a lightning storm of questions. So each of the panels will have a few questions. We're going to have them to respond, and then we'll go to the next panelist. And when they've all kind of shared what they had to share, we're going to have a round table and allow them to communicate with one another and kind of provide feedback on what they've heard. And we'll do that for a few minutes, and then it's going to get really fun because then we're going to ask for your feedback and questions so that we can really engage in a regional dialogue around this issue. How does that sound? Great. So my first question for Dr. Holmes, what is your role at the Appalachian Regional Commission, and what can you tell us about the economic impact that the commission has had on distressed communities where the ARC is located?
Okay, great question. First of all, I'd like to thank you for having me here this afternoon. And I would be remiss if I did not share that Governor Ralph Northam is the newly elected state's co-chair for the Appalachian Regional Commission. So Governor Northam will be serving as the state's co-chair for 2021. I actually serve as the Virginia Appalachian Regional Commission Program Manager, where I work very closely with our team at the Virginia Department of Housing and Community Development to help develop projects and administer projects within our Appalachian region. I mean, just to give you a little bit about our region, it's made up of 25 counties, 8 cities, and we currently have 4 distressed counties in Virginia. And since 1965, which is when the commission was established, as Ava talked about earlier, we've invested our money in many different ways within the Commonwealth of Virginia. So I just wanted to kind of give you a picture of how we've invested our funding that we receive from the commission. So we've invested about 41% of our funding in physical improvements, which are things like Access Road, which Ava talked a little bit about, as well as community development projects, traditional projects that involve infrastructure such as water and sewer. We've also invested 37% of our funding in workforce development and education, and then 10% of our resources, which I'll talk a little bit about later, around asset-based development and building local and leadership capacity in communities. And then the last 12% really catalyzing regional development. Within our ARC region in Virginia, we're really big on both local and regional capacity. So, and I'll share a little bit about that later. And then one important thing, which I think is important as we're all having this conversation about the Southeast Commission, the Crescent Commission, is really about kind of what's happened with the Appalachian Regional Commission. And just so you all know, for every dollar invested in the ARC region, and this is across all 13 states, there's an average of $8 in leverage funds. So for every dollar of grant money invested, there's $8 generated. And as Ava shared, there's been significant improvement in the region, and you all are aware the purpose of the region was to bring the commission was to bring the ARC region up to parity with the remainder of the United States. And while the region does still lag behind the rest of the nation on average, there's been significant improvements in our region, such as the reduction in the number of high poverty counties. There's a 50% decrease in the number of population that are below the poverty level. There's been an increase in high school graduation rates. The number of folks that have a bachelor's degree or higher is 4 times higher than it was in 1970. There's been a huge increase in per capita income. And one of the important things that we're still actually investing in Virginia and plenty of other states is the availability of potable water as well as sanitary sewer. So we're still investing in traditional infrastructure projects within the region. So I think that answered your first question, Ava.
Absolutely. Thank you. I'm trying to help Cliff Albright get into the session, so hopefully he'll join us. What have you found to be the most effective strategies that federal commissions can employ to move the most distressed counties to resilience?
Sure. So one of the things that's been really important in the region, and one of the things that we just deployed as a mantra really of the Department of Housing and Community Development in Virginia, is building community capacity and asset-based development. So those are the 2 most effective strategies that we deploy within the Commonwealth, both throughout the work we do as an agency, but also specifically within the ARC region. And Virginia is not alone in that. Virginia is, a lot of our other states also invest in community capacity building as well as asset-based development. And some of those grants are called things like Flexi Grant or Planning Grant. So I just kind of, for those of you that are not in Virginia, if you talk to my counterparts in the other states, they invest in community capacity building and asset-based development using something called Flexi Grants or Planning Grants. And in Virginia, as Ava talked about earlier, we invest both financial and non-financial resources. So we actually have staff that are on at the Department of Housing and Community Development whose full-time job is to go out and help communities with capacity building. One of which I know has a great relationship with Ava, and I don't know if Ramona's on, but I'll give a shout out to Ramona Chapman, who is with the Department of Housing and Community Development, who was a community capacity builder. As an agency, we look at communities in a holistic approach. We require that a variety of stakeholders have a seat at the table, whether it's at a planning stage, project development, and implementation of projects. We feel like projects aren't sustainable if you don't start off with locally driven and regionally driven efforts from the community level. One example I'll give you is we have an effort that we funded in far Southwest Virginia called Rally. And what's happened in this initiative was there are 8 communities that really needed to work around building local capacity with bringing in entrepreneurs. These communities had done some business district revitalization, or these communities were looking to do some business district improvements. And we work with a local grantee to give out $3,000 grants to these communities to build local capacity around entrepreneurship. And one of the greatest things that happened for one of our towns was that they took that $3,000 and was able to have it multiply 4 times. And they built a local stage in their downtown so that they could have community groups get together, do performances, and have community events. And this was all locally driven from a $3,000 grant investment, which is what we call Flexi Grants.
Wow. So this is going to be a question, it's going to be a recurring question because it is a big conversation that is happening throughout the region with respect to regional commissions. And so I'm going to pose it first to you. What strategies have you found to be effective in ensuring that commission programs are inclusive of and meet the needs of local populations in distressed communities?
So again, I'll focus on the asset-based development piece. To me, it's the greatest tool in our toolbox around community economic development. We, as I said earlier, we don't just invest in traditional community economic development projects, such as water and sewer. We also look at ways to identify our local assets. And honestly, our residents are our biggest asset. We believe that in Virginia. So one of the things we've done is, I can't take credit for it, this is something that was around before I got to the state, is investing in the creative economy. And if you know anything about Appalachian history and Appalachian roots, Appalachia has deep roots in music and artistry and culture. And one of the things we've done in Virginia, if you're familiar with the Crooked Road, which is not just in Virginia now, it's 330 miles of driving trails through the mountains of Southwest Virginia. It connects 9 major venues, 60 affiliated venues, and festivals that are in 19 counties, 4 cities, and 50 towns. I had to make sure I got that right. And what this does is, this is an initiative that focuses on the music of the region. And what we're doing is leveraging our resources in the region with building, it's a drivable trail. If you ever get a chance to drive to Southwest Virginia, you'll see the kiosk, you'll see the map of the Crooked Road and the impact that it's had. And this was created in 2003. And there was a study done in 2015 by Virginia Tech studying the economic impact of the Crooked Road since its existence over a 12-year period. So just to give you some stats, $6.4 million have been invested from tourists annually in Southwest Virginia as a result of the Crooked Road. $1.2 million total economic impact, over 131 full-time equivalent jobs, and 42% of the folks that come to the region to learn more about the Crooked Road and experience the culture and the music of Southwest Virginia are from outside of the region. The other thing that we've done, so again, that's an asset of the region. So we've looked at, what are some assets within the Appalachian region? Music and culture is one of them. The other thing is the beautiful outdoor recreation and opportunities in Southwest Virginia. Again, looking at the creative economy, and we've made a lot of investments in outdoor recreation and tourism within Southwest Virginia. And ironically, our traditional projects have led to that. So things like having safe and sanitary sewer allows you to clean up the river and the lakes and the water, so that we can actually help develop communities around the assets. So one of the most recent things we've done under Friends of Southwest Virginia, which is a regional entity in Southwest Virginia, we've developed a lot of our rivers, and the Clinch River Initiative, if any of those folks aren't here, it's called Curvy. So they've done a lot of things with putting in boat launches and also building boardwalks. And a lot of our assets are within our downtowns. So what's happening as you're cleaning up the river and you're building businesses around it, your downtown revitalization starts to be revigorated within the community. So it's overall impact of what's going on in the community. And what's happening is new businesses are popping up. So like outfitters, people that rent kayaks and rent canoes. Then you've got lodging that will come behind it. So what we're seeing is that while we've made investments in, with our partners agencies around cleaning up rivers and making sure that the assets are marketed both within the region and outside the region, leveraging assets within the region is very important. So I would say what things you want to do, again, your people are your greatest asset first, but then also identifying what other assets you have within your communities in your region and figuring out ways to leverage those assets to develop economic development opportunities for your community. So that's what I would say is the most effective strategy.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Wow. So our next panelist is Dr. Veronica Womack, and she is one of the leading voices on Black Belt economy and the Black Belt rule issues. And we're so grateful to have her. Before she starts, I just want to point out that there is a poll that Alita has listed for you. And please, as you are listening intently to Dr. Veronica Womack's responses, also please take the time to respond to the polls. Welcome to us for us. She is, let me go back and say, she is has long been a professor at Georgia College and State University, and she is the executive director of the Rural Studies Institute, and she is my dear longtime friend. And so I am so grateful to have her to join us. Welcome to you.
Oh, thank you.
My first question, thank you. My first question to you is, what are some of the unique challenges found in Black Belt counties that result in their inability to participate in traditional economic development strategies, in your opinion?
Well, first, thank you so much, Ava, for providing this opportunity to talk about the Black Belt. That's something that I always enjoy speaking about because I'm from the region and I just see such potential here. First, I'd like to say, unlike the Appalachian region, we have to think about the fact that the Appalachian region has had a 60-year head start in terms of traditional economic development strategies. So unlike the Appalachian region, you have the Black Belt region that is dogged by an inconsistent identity. There is not a consistent identity when we talk about the Black Belt. We have this general discussion of from Texas to Virginia, but it's very important to recognize the infrastructure that has been built in Appalachia over time that helps to feed this creative economy and all of these strategies of economic development that Tamara talked about. So when it comes to Appalachia, you have this partnership of the ARC with scholars, cultural studies. You even have Appalachian studies at institutions, right? That you can get a major in, that you can really understand the cultural heritage of this region. We don't have that in the Black Belt. So there's several challenges that creates, one of which many of these communities don't have a traditional economic development infrastructure at the local level. So you have some Black Belt communities that have local economic development authorities or personnel that are focused on economic development, but that is not always the case in the Black Belt. So if you are in a county that does not have a local economic development infrastructure, that's a barrier. Another barrier is the lack of broadband in many of these communities. You know, a lot of your federal agencies and resources are now online. So even us talking here today, right? Many of us are located in rural communities, and it's very difficult for us to even get online to talk about this commission today. And so when you're talking about uploading grant applications and getting information to prepare your grant application, that's a barrier to Black Belt communities. Also, I found that some of the requirements of traditional economic development strategies, such as matching funds, and I'll talk about that a little later, but you also have economic development being operated within a community of specialists. And so many of those specialists do not live in Black Belt communities. And so they don't necessarily understand how policy gets implemented on the ground. I'll stop there.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. So what has your work revealed to be the most important factor in equipping the community-based community economic development organizations to gain access to those resources that you just discussed?
Okay, one of the things that I would like to have us think about is that we don't need to confuse the broad South with the Black Belt South in terms of the number of community-based organizations that are available, that are working, particularly when you're talking about community-based organizations that are focused specifically on economic development. That number is relatively small. So I often tell people, I live right now in Milledgeville, Georgia, and Milledgeville and the other Georgia is quite different than Atlanta, and Atlanta is the South. So when we think about equipping community-based organizations, there is a lot of work to do in terms of providing resources to those that are available, and then helping to launch additional community-based infrastructure in the Black Belt region. So we have some traditional groups that have been around for many decades that continue to struggle for resources, right? And so many of the areas that they work in is not necessarily traditional economic development strategies. So we could definitely build up personnel infrastructure in community-based organizations, but also think about creating additional infrastructure for community-based organizations. In addition to that, you have local economic development specialists at the local level or at the state level, and their staff is limited as well. So there's not a lot of folk working specifically on economic development strategies in the South. I also think just, basic communication of what's available is often lacking. That's why I continue to talk about the need for people to recognize the distinctiveness of the Black Belt and the culture that is here and the history that created this culture. Because we often, especially in policy implementation, we think that we can write a policy and then, regardless of place, the implementation is going to be the same. And that has not been the case in the Black Belt region. You have on the Appalachian side, you have this infrastructure, right, of people who understand that culture, who understand the assets of that community, and they can work together. I can't necessarily say that that is always the culture of the Black Belt region.
So as we move forward, once we get through the panels, we have a little time. I'm going to ask you to kind of give us a definition of the Southern Black Belt. I kind of want to delve into that a little deeper, but we want to first make sure that we cover all the topics. So if you'll just put a pin in that one for me, I would like to discuss the distinction that you made between what is the Black Belt South versus the broader South. But for now, I'm going to go on to our next question to talk about some really exciting work that you've done recently in partnership with the Roosevelt Institute and SEEP And it's a study that I believe was recently published, recently released by SEEP. And it focused on the accessibility of federal regional commissions for distressed communities and vulnerable populations that are within their footprints. Can you share some of those findings with us?
Yes, this particular report was focused specifically on the Delta Regional Authority. And so it was a wonderful opportunity because, that was the 20-year anniversary of the DRA. And you actually have some Black Belt counties within that structure. In fact, all of the Alabama counties are Black Belt counties. So it was really good to be able to look at it. So the findings include, of course, the need for additional resources for regional commissions in the Black Belt. There's just the money, even with the DRA, the money is not enough. We have to think about the region itself and what is needed in the region. And so when we think about building commissions, we have to build commissions that have the capacity to deal with what the issues are in the region. And so I did not find that. So that was definitely a finding. The need to eliminate matching funds for many of these economic development grants. If you are a persistent poverty county, which most of our Black Belt counties tend to be, the likelihood of you being able to get resources to match funds is limited. You know, even as in your work in economic development, Ava, that is often a challenge. And so when we think about having communities find matching funds, that's often a barrier. And, you know, you often hear people say, well, you know, they can get the matching from another agency. Well, many of the local development officials that I talked to said no agency wants to be first, right? Once you get the first one, then other people will help, but that's a significant barrier. And so there's also a need to focus more policy implementation as it relates to persistent poverty counties, so the neediest counties. So what often happens is you have this creaming effect. Okay, so you have limited resources, and then you have counties that have limited infrastructure. And so you want to get a win, so you're going to go for the counties that you can get a win. And often the neediest counties are not the counties that are able to access the resources because of what's on the ground or what's not on the ground locally. There's also, I had one official speak to the fact that we can't even get to economic development because we gotta build capacity, community capacity, to be able to do economic development. And I would be, you know, remiss as a political scientist not to talk about the politics. No one wants to talk about that. But in the Deep South, economic development is definitely connected in many ways to relationships, and how those relationships play out is often political. And so I'd love to talk about, you know, political schmoozing does not mean that you don't actually get your grant favored, but I am not able to say that at this point. I can't say that everything is politically neutral. And I also, some of the findings were the lack of representation. The people that are actually being impacted by, you know, the policy is not always at the table. I loved Tamara's discussion about having, you know, people at the decision-making table locally, but we have to think about and be real about what the environment is in rural Black Belt communities for that to happen. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. So I had this question about participatory governance as I posed it to Tamara. I was also going to pose it to you, but we have a roundtable coming up. And so in the interest of time, we know that question's out there. Okay. I'm going to hold it for your conversation among yourselves, because I feel like it'll be a very spirited discussion between what we've heard from Tamara and what we've now heard from you. Yeah. And I'm going to move on, but we will pose that question when we get to the roundtable session. How about that? So my next guest is another one of my longtime friends who I love dearly. I'm glad he was finally able to make it. I could not be more proud of him and my sister Latasha Brown for what they have accomplished in the last 2 or 3 years. And you have to have been under a rock not to see the role that they played in this recent, in the last several years, last 2 or 3 years of elections, including the most recent election. And so he really does not, at this point, need an introduction, because it's hard not to know who they are right now. But I'm so grateful that he was able to join us. This is Cliff Albright. He is the executive director and co-founder of the Black Voters Matter Fund. And without further ado, I'd like to just welcome you for joining us. Welcome you.
Thanks for having me, Ava. Great to be here. Sorry for the delay, but glad to be here.
Not a problem. We all made it. Things happen. So my first question for you is, as our region prepares to plan for implementing the Southeast Crescent Regional Commission to make vital investments and strengthen local communities, economies, what do you see as the leading barrier? What are some of the leading barriers to economic parity for vulnerable communities?
Yeah, it's a great question. You know, to a certain extent, you know, you got different sets of barriers. You've got those that are really connected to like issues of economic and development, or the ones that at least we more traditionally think of. And we've talked about some of them, right? It's issues of infrastructure, whether that be roads or technological infrastructure, internet access, right? You've got all those things that Veronica and Tamara have talked about, you know, but you've also got you've got issues of access to capital. Like one of the things that I did when I was living in the Alabama Black Belt when we first met was that I had a mortgage company, because what I recognized was that our people were being denied access to home ownership. And as many of you know, home ownership is one of the main ways by which you're able to generate assets and wealth and savings, which you can then use for what? You can use it to educate, to pay for your child's education. Some people use it to pay for their businesses, right? A lot of entrepreneurship starts with the assets and the equity that people have in their own homes. And so just having access to that capital that many local banks, unfortunately, are still unwilling to provide to our community, or at least unwilling to provide at equal rates as they provided to the white community, then you know, if you don't have that access to capital, then that's a significant barrier. Even with the federal resources that something like the Regional Commission can bring in, you still got to have those private players, that private capital playing a role in the community. So you got some of these, you got that said, you've got those economic barriers, but then you've got the other ones. And Veronica touched on this. She really stole my thunder, right? Because she talked about these political barriers. The reality is that economic development, economics in general, markets exist within a political context, right? There is no isolation of one versus the other. Slavery was clearly an economic system. And yet it was an economic system that had the protection of the US Constitution and state constitutions and a whole series of black codes and slave codes, et cetera. Same thing applies to Jim Crow and segregation, right? These are both a combination of political manifestations, sharecropping, this political manifestations, as well as the economic manifestations. And so one of the barriers is that until we really have a fully functioning economy, fully functioning democracy, right? Until we can really have representation, because think about, and I like the way Veronica talked about the implementation issues. Think about how some of these programs get implemented, right? Again, it's with the support, hopefully, of what the county commission making some funds, or maybe some variances, or maybe some codes, right? But you've got to have some local governance that helps this process move along, or else you can have funding without the access to actually make it happen. We've seen situations in the work that we do at Black Voters Matter where there have been local governments that have been run by old power structures that have refused outside money, whether that be federal funding, or whether that be outside companies or corporations that are saying, look, we want to come to community and we can bring 100 jobs. We've seen local governance that said, we'd rather keep things the way we have in order to maintain the status quo than to have this new development that comes in. Because when you bring in that new development and when you bring in these economic opportunities, what happens? People start getting ideas about freedom, right? People start getting ideas about bettering their lives and changing some of the other things within the status quo. And so one of the main barriers is this political aspect that that Veronica talked about. The good news, though, is that as you just alluded to, Ava, there's some stuff going on in the South, right? There's a new South rising, right? There's an expansion of political power amongst those who have been at the bottom, right? Y'all may have heard that there's a little something that just happened in the state of Georgia, and so there are all kinds of opportunities related to the same issue. The same thing as the barrier can also be the greatest opportunity that we have coming out of such a commission.
Thank you. As expected, you always deliver. Can you tell us what you think finally can be gained from a well-funded SCRC? You've kind of already shared that, but can you kind of go into that, elaborate on that a little bit more?
Yeah, yeah, because, you know, again, you've got the economic gains, the economic opportunities that can come from a well-funded SCRC, but you've also got this crossplay, right? A well-funded SCRC, a well-funded regional commission that's creating economic opportunities can further the process of expanding this democracy. It can further the process of people feeling like they're included. It can further the process of people even participating in the governance. You talked about the participatory planning and everything, of participating in the process. It can bring economic development that in turn makes people feel like that they've got something at stake in the system, right? That when we talk about, hey, do you want to register to vote, or are you planning to vote in your local elections or your federal elections, instead of the response being, you know what, I'm not going to participate because I don't see the fruits of my participation, a well-funded SCRC can provide the very fruits that often is necessary in order to get people to further participate within the democratic process. And then in doing that, what are you doing? It's a virtuous cycle, right? You have an SCRC that brings development, it deepens civic engagement, and in turn, because civic engagement and democracy has been expanded, you're now further strengthening the economic development and the possibilities of a regional commission. It's a virtuous cycle, and we can really give a big jumpstart to that cycle by getting this fully funded SCRC.
Absolutely. And Tamara, I'm going to put you on the spot for 15 seconds. Would you share something that you shared with us on our prep call last Friday about how the folks in Appalachia, just to follow up on what Cliff said, how the folks in Appalachia get together and get on their horses and wagons and come to General Assembly every year to make their demands? Do you mind just sharing that with us quickly about how that happens?
Sure. So I'm letting the secret out the bag. So yes, every year, at the beginning of General Assembly session and throughout the session, the coalfield counties in Southwest Virginia get together and they come to Richmond. And they've gotten so good at it in the time I've been at the agency that they pull multiple funding agencies together in one meeting and present their whole portfolio of what they want to do. And it is I will tell you, Ava, that was the first time I met Ava. I said, man, we've got to get other folks to think like that within Virginia and kind of descend upon Richmond and present what you want to do for your communities for your next couple of years. So yes, I'll give credit to the folks in the coal fields in Southwest Virginia. They do make their way to Richmond every single assembly session and meet with everyone possible.
Thank you. Thank you for that. We are running out of time, and I'm getting a little anxious because I want to get all of these great panelists in. So we're going to move on now quickly. Oh, before I go, there's another poll. Please be sure to answer. This one says, which would you say is more important to the region at this time? Please submit your answers and listen attentively to Dr. Ali Bustamante. I have just recently met Dr. Bustamante, but I am familiar with the organization he is with, and it is another powerhouse organization, as you probably all may well know, a little thing called Georgia. He is the Senior Research Associate with the Roosevelt Institute and the Southern Economic Advancement Project, of which none other than Stacey Abrams is the executive director. And so we are glad to hear from you. Congratulations to her on the Nobel Prize nomination. We could not be more proud in the South for that. But welcome to you for joining us today, and thank you.
Great, thank you so much for having me. Again, it's a great collection of folks you've gotten here today.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So my first question to you is, you recently, another published report by the Roosevelt Institute and SEEP, you recently published a report about community-centered employment. Can you explain to us what that is and how a regional federal commission can support this concept?
Yes, our report proposes a community-centered model for the realignment of work and economic development based on the shared values, strengths, and needs within any given community. Communities know what's most important to them, whether it's the preservation of life, culture, or an environment, or improved economic and health outcomes. Therefore, a community-centered approach to economic development and employment leads with these communal values and leverages the local strengths to address the most pressing and social and economic needs, whether they're particular skill sets, a body of knowledge, common among residents, or unique cultural and environmental characteristics. Communities have critical assets that can be employed to fight the long-standing issues of population decline, environmental degradation, rampant inequality, and an eroding quality of life. Yet, as we've heard, particularly from Dr. Womack, that these communities lack the resources to fully implement the new economic visions that they have based on this community-centered approach. And here's where regional federal commissions can really serve as partners to communities in the South with plans to improve their local economies and infrastructure.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And what have I also noticed that in some of your work, you've talked about some of the limitations of conventional economic development in persistent poverty areas. Can you elaborate on that some for us?
Absolutely. Not leveraging the access to the capital investments and networks of regional federal commissions that have proven very effective in the past is really the error that I think has been mentioned today and that we all know very well. Just to give an example, when we think about the ARC and the work that it's supported in the region, one example that comes to mind to me is in Burke County, North Carolina. For several years now, an organization called the Industrial Commons has been doing some great work, and it's in a community that's structured around the textile industry that, as we know, nationally has been really suffering for some time now, and yet they've been able to have a textile industry that is thriving while also providing livable wages and opportunities for worker ownership. Most recently, the ARC actually worked with the Industrial Commons to access the capital that they needed to support businesses to pivot from the production of textiles to the production of PPE and cloth face coverings when the pandemic struck and the demand for textiles shrunk. As a result of their efforts, the Industrial Commons paid out over $2 million to more than 60 businesses that were able to remain profitable, workers remain employed, and the community made a vital contribution to a national effort. So it's very much possible.
Wow. Well, that's a perfect segue to our next guest, and because we want to talk about research and innovation in the market potential of other sustainable industries, in this case, the forestry industry. And so I'd like to introduce Alton Perry. He is the program manager for the Sustainable Forestry and Land Retention Project at the Roanoke Electric Cooperative. And thank you for joining us. Are you still with us?
Yes, Ava, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure, the pleasure. So what is the approach of the Roanoke Electrical Cooperative in creating intergenerational wealth, particularly among African American communities, because I think that's a particular focus for you, like what you've done in Northeast North Carolina, utilizing the natural resources in areas that are basically, cash poor and resource rich with respect to, land.
Right. Well, I will also say that on the call today is the CEO of Roanoke Electric Cooperative, Mr. Curtis Wynn, who can definitely speak to the broader picture of the advances that Roanoke Electric is taking on when it comes to broadband and enhancing the quality of life in the diverse community that we serve, which is a part of Roanoke Electric's mission. And I've heard many people today talk about asset and asset mapping. And oftentimes we may overlook an asset that we have right outside our door or throughout our community is our agricultural and our forestry assets. And what this project has done through the great partnership of the U.S. Endowment for Forestry and Communities, U.S. Forest Service, Natural Resource Conservation Service, forest industry, state universities, bringing together these resources to assist landowners to get access to information and education, technical assistance, and also addressing the issue around heirs property and land retention. And so the model that we have is taking those resources, and we are bringing those resources to the landowners, specifically focusing in on African-American landowners. If you know through the statistics that you've probably seen that there's been a tremendous issue of land loss. And so through this model, which the Roanoke Sustainable Forestry and Land Retention Project is one of 8 projects in this space throughout the South in the Black Belt. Some of my colleagues are on the call today, like the Black Family Land Trust there with Ebony Alexander. And so we're looking at using these assets, and as Ebony says, make these a performing asset that landowners can use their forest resources to gain wealth, and the benefits that we receive as a community with clean air, clean water, reduction in soil erosion, and also sequestering carbon. All these things are part of the markets. And in our region, forestry is approximately has about $1 billion economic impact. And so when landowners do the work to create opportunities on their forest land, they create jobs that remain in the area.
Wonderful. Can you give us an example of what this looks like in practice?
Yes, of course. So many of the landowners we work with, first of all, they really never thought about their forest land as being an asset until we speak with them and our partners. And so through this partnership, we've been able to gain access for these landowners to about $500,000 over the last 5 to 6 years. And also additional resources. It could be a family like Forties Acres that has about 25 acres of unproductive forest land that is now productive, but they have also diversified their operation by including funds through USDA, and they have a high tunnel, and they are producing local vegetables, not only to sell, but also to be in the supply chain and support their local community. Or it's the Graves family, who has about 120 acres or so of forest land and agricultural land, where the agricultural land is producing crops, and also they have livestock, but the forest land had not been addressed. It was 60 acres is growing up in weeds and brush. And now the family has a productive young pine stand that the next generation can also create and continue that legacy on.
Thank you. Thank you. I had one more question about the role of regional federal commissions in that work, but I think, like I did with Dr. Womack, I'd like to save that for our roundtable as we are getting close on time. And I think some of that will come out in your discussion with one another. So I'm going to move on now. Thank you. To Ms. Ramona Taylor. We have another poll. I'm sorry, before we get started. What would you like to ask of the governor in your SCR state to do if the SCRC is launched this year? So if you would answer that question as we introduce Ramona Taylor Williams, who's my new friend from Mississippi. She is the executive director of Montgomery Communities United for Prosperity. Welcome to you, Ms. Taylor Williams. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Ava. Thank you for inviting me to be a part of this very exciting and invigorating quest that we are embarking upon. And I am 100% in support of the commission. It is needed. And so we are going to do everything within our power, which is not very much, but what we can, in order to get behind you and to make this thing happen.
Thank you. Thank you for that. So we're running short on time, and I'm so sorry. You never have enough time to talk about these very important issues. But if you please mute yourself. If you are not muted, please mute yourself. Thank you. Recently at a Southern Echo meeting in Mississippi, some of my favorite people, I heard you speak so powerfully about the barriers to building local capacity and gaining access to the regional federal commissions in your state. If you could name 3 things that local communities can do to more effectively access the resources that are so important to moving towards economic resilience, what would they be? I think you're muted again. There you go.
Sorry. The first thing that I'm going to use as an example, the project that I've been working on since 2018 in a small community called Duck Hill, Mississippi. And we were awarded $300,000 from the Southeastern Sustainability Directors Network to create a model for sustainable community and economic development in a rural environment. And one of the things that was a criteria for competing for the funding was the town or the jurisdiction needed to have a plan, a sustainability plan. Well, in small rural communities, number one, they don't have the resources to have planning staff. And number two, most folks don't and have not heard about sustainability. So what we did was we began to engage. The first thing that we did was community engagement. Bring residents in the community, those folks that were viewed as leaders, bring them together in the community and hold a listening session to find out collectively what residents in their community felt were their number one priorities that needed to be resolved. What were those issues? And of course, in this particular community, their main issue was flooding. The town flooded profusely. So that became a number one priority. So when you ask, what can we do? For me, and the strategy that I use as a community and economic development practitioner is community engagement, but not just community engagement, meaningful community engagement, and bringing the people to the table to meet them where they are. From community engagement, it is well, and community must be informed. Usually they know what their problems and what their needs are, but where they might not know is how to go about solving those problems and turning those needs into assets. Tamara talked about community asset building, and that's what we want to do. We want to turn our communities and our disadvantages into advantages. The other thing is, I would think that after community is being informed, we need to know who the players are. So we do what I call an environmental scan, and we look at the systems to see which systems and which agencies within those systems do we need to know, how they function, what they bring to the table, and how do we get them to the table. So I would think that those are the 3 things. And the other thing that I must lift up is the importance of having real-time data and how important data is to defending our issues and to bringing our issues to the forefront. We can bring the issues and go before City Council. We can talk all we want about the problems, but we must be able to defend.
I think I'm muted this time. Thank you for that. I do have a third question. And again, like I did 2 other times, I'm going to save that one for the roundtable because I'd like to move on to Michael Carter Jr. And that one is about how our communities can prepare for the commission as we plan for its arrival. Someone's not muted again. There's another poll question. This one is a two-part question that talks about strengths and weaknesses of our region as it compares to other regions of the country. And I'd like you to respond to that as you listen to Mr. Michael Carter Jr. He is the Small Farm Resource Center Coordinator for Virginia State University. And are you with us? I know we're having some technical issues a second ago. Are you with us, Mr. Carter?
Yes, ma'am, I'm here.
Wonderful. So here's my question for you. Part of your work at Virginia State University focuses on the rise and fall of Black farmers in the Southeast and the barriers to economic resilience in Black communities. Is there a direct correlation between economic resilience in the rural South and the loss of Black farmers?
Well, thank you for your question. And I'd say definitely there's a direct correlation between economic resilience, which is directly proportionate to the rise and loss of Black farmers in the South. The U.S., as many of us know, was founded with land ownership being the basis for economic and political power. As Dr. Womack and Mr. Albright had stated earlier, alluded to earlier, politics and economics are closely related, and many times one and the same. And recall going back, the Freedmen's Bureau was created within 3 years of the formation of the USDA in the early 1860s. With the Freedmen's Bureau created in 1865, USDA created in 1862. Unfortunately, the Freedmen's Bureau was short-lived, only lasting about 12 years, but the residue of that institution fostered the rise and growth of Black farmers and, more importantly, Black farm ownership. So our economic sustainability and power in this country was at its peak between the 1910s through the 1930s. At the same time, we had peak numbers of Black farmers, which at the time in the state of Virginia was 50,000 Black farmers in the state. And I think we were running around probably close to 1 million Black farmers in the U.S. And if we look at the decline of the Black farmer, especially between the 1970s and 1990s, the economic resilience in our community was not nearly as high, which created economic opportunity vacuum for other economic and many times more parasitic enterprises that did much more harm than good in our communities. And we're still feeling the residual effects of those institutions today. We recently witnessed the political pushes in the South, specifically in Georgia, and the amount of groundwork and efforts that it took to affect this change. However, I know many of us probably saw those maps colored in blue, red and blue back in November, around November 4th, 5th, 6th, and you saw how much land was covered in red versus how much land was covered in blue. And that's a telling sign. Those maps reveal the power of land ownership, where you have these states with larger landowners wielding the same, if not more, political power than high concentrations of Black populations in urban centers. For our economic future, Black farmers will be critical for our growth into the 21st century. It's essential that in moving forward with population shifting in demographics, the Black farmers and Black landowners are still the basis for our general power and influence in the society. I strongly suggest a reverse migration is needed, a greater migration that's needed to acquire land, purchase land, and have land ownership in the rural South, rural areas, and even in the West. With a Freedmen's Bureau-like financial support structure to assist in sustaining those institutions, with a specific focus on the needs of our farmers. The future of Black farmers and Black communities depends upon Black ownership and a Black land ownership boom for it to become a reality.
And so we're running about 5 minutes behind schedule, but that's okay. That gives us about 10 minutes for a quick roundtable. And what I'd like to do, this is the fun part for me. I wonder if the panelists have any questions or feedback for one another for what they've heard today. I've noticed you all intently taking notes on what you've heard. And there have been some common threads, but there have been some nuances that you all bring. And so I'd like to ask if you guys would just kind of allow us, if we had an opportunity to be flies on the wall of this brain trust, what would we hear for the next 10 minutes or so? And I will remind you of the 3 questions that we kind of left on the table if you need a place to start. I doubt some of you will need one. But those 3 questions were, how important is a participatory governance model for federal regional commissions? How should communities prepare for economic resilience with the commission coming? And what do you see how do you see the role of federal commissions in some of the work that we have heard mentioned here today? Those are the three questions. And now I'm going to not moderate, I'm going to listen. And don't everyone start first. Go ahead, Tamara.
Well, honestly, I mean, I think the role of federal commissions are important. Of course, I represent the Appalachian Regional Commission, but there's a uniqueness to this commission. This is not folks in DC telling folks in Virginia, to tell folks what to do locally. This is a joint partnership between our states in the region and the federal government. And I know Olivia's on the line from North Carolina, and I would say definitely if you're in North Carolina, Virginia, I'm pretty sure, I think David's on from Maryland, reach out to your Appalachian Regional Commission program managers, because I think that there's a lot of, as Dr. Womack said earlier, there's a lot of history around the commission, and I think that some of it can be potentially replicated for the South. I'm going to always butcher this acronym, for the new Southeast Commission. There's some opportunities there of lessons learned, both good and bad, that can be used to set up a very strong commission for the Black Belt. So I would say definitely look at the model that ARC has established and utilize your program managers, because they best know what's happening within your respective states. So that's what I would say.
Dr. Womack, I'd like to hear what you have to say about this participatory governance issue.
Oh, okay. I think it is most important. So as I stated earlier, to know the Appalachian region is to know that there's this long history of developing community empowerment so that they do feel comfortable on their horses riding to Richmond, right, to ask for things. And so I think that is, we have to think about that in the rural South, as Cliff talked about, how politics is actually done, how decision-making is done in this moment in the rural South, and how oftentimes the people that are most impacted are not at the table. They don't have the information. Information is closely kept, right? Even from public entities. So people around the table making decisions is very important, that those people that are around the table are reflective of the community. And I'm speaking reflective in terms of race, class, gender. It is most important. Census tract, neighborhood, it's most important at the local level. And we're not there yet. I think we have a long history of top-down local decision-making in the rural South. And those that try to speak often are sidelined or sometimes categorized as troublemakers, right? And so I think if we're going to create a structure in the rural South that is going to determine economic development, it has to be reflective of the conditions on the ground. And as Tamara just said, what we have in the ARC now is not necessarily what they started with. There were tweaks along the way. And so we need to learn from the ARC model, but also recognize that the Appalachian communities are distinctive, and so are the Black Belt communities. They are very distinctive. The plantation economy that grew these Black Belt counties they help to shape how we make decisions. Who's at the table? I think Cliff talked about how some communities may even turn back money, to keep power in a small group. And so I think we have to be realistic. I'm often a naysayer in terms of how we do this, because I want us to do it right. I don't want us to create something that the very people that this is created to help and serve do not have access to it. I think we have a wonderful opportunity. This is an inflection point in the South to create something that is specific to the culture, the history, the current circumstances of the South, and we have to be realistic about that.
Thank you. Dr. Bustamante and Cliff, I'm sure that you have something to say on that subject there. I'd like to hear.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. As you know, it really is a bit of an echo in our thought here, which is that the communities do have these very strong perspectives about what's needed. They do have a great assessment of what needs to be done. The main channels that really a federal regional commission has an opportunity to play here is to be that supporter through that mechanism of capital, and not in a one-off way, not in a seed funding way, but really as a sustained partner over time.
Thank
you. Yeah, you know, I think in order to really get to, you know, this real participatory governance and community involvement, you know, I kind of feel like, and I don't want to be the Debbie Downer or whatever, but you know, right now we're having a whole discussion around voter suppression and how one of the main things missing from the voter suppression discussion, even the current Voting Rights Act, HR 1, the John Lewis Act, is you know, there's no real question of consequences for those who suppress. Like even getting back to you know, restoring Section 5 and pre-clearance, right? That's great on the front end, but on the back end, there's always been a shortcoming, and whether it's because of qualified immunity, right, or whatever else, when those, whether it's the Secretary of State, local officials, when those folks suppress, there's no consequences for them, right? Now, what's the connection between what we're talking about with the SCRC and the governance models? I think, because I wouldn't want to be naive, and I don't think anybody on this call is, but there are going to be forces, local forces, that are going to resist that type of, hey, they resist participatory governance on the current governance structures, right? And so there's no reason for us to think that they're just gonna cede over power on this new structure that involves potentially millions of dollars in federal funding. So there's going to be resistance. So I think part of the discussion around participatory governance, in addition to like, how do we raise awareness? How do we educate folks? Like, you know, what's the process that we use? I think we have to also have a real discussion. It's unfortunate, but it's real. We got to have a real discussion around what are the safeguards going to be, you know, so that if you do have local entities that are trying to block or prevent true participatory governance, or even just true access, put aside the participatory governance, just access to resources, right? That if you've got some forces that are blocking that, what are the mechanisms going to be for holding them accountable? It's what's the economic development equivalent of like what we saw during the Obama administration, where they had like consent decrees with police departments that were found to be abusing you know, Black bodies, right? And so you hate to think that that's necessary. You hate to go into this thinking of, you know, what are the controls going to be on those bad players, those bad actors. But y'all, we're talking about the American South, and if we're gonna, you know, we can't not think that there aren't going to be some local local bad actors. And I don't say that, I'm going to be clear, I don't say it to say to go with the whole trope of putting down the South, because I believe, as Brother Malcolm said, if you're south of the Canadian border, you're in the South. So I'm not saying that just to you know, pile on the South, but you know, there's some realities that we have to deal with in addition to just, you know, getting the logistics and the process and awareness and the education right. We have to be strategic in thinking about what those accountability measures are going to be.
And not to steal Cliff's thunder, but I think as a funder, I think those are our responsibilities. And I would tell you that if you talk to many of my counterparts that are on this, you know, Zoom call, we look for those things. We say, who is at the table? Show us who's at the table. Is this a representation of your community? And that's what's important. And I just don't, you know, I have another job. I run the broadband office. It's about who's at the table, who are the stakeholders, and us as funders making sure that every single voice is at the table and heard.
And I'd like to amen that for her. I do know I have experiences in both the Deep South and in, you know, this state of Virginia, and my experience has been they are very vehement. They are adamant about making sure that we have stakeholder involvement. And I have also worked in other places, as you know, Cliff and Veronica know that is not the case. And so that is why I thought that this conversation was important, because it is not the same in every part of the region. And there are places where folks are going to have to deal with some of the power structures that are in place in their counties where they are trying to gain access to the resources. Thank you for that. We are about 3 minutes overdue to open the floor. As we receive yet another poll, what is the most important strategy for building economic resilience in the region? And if you would answer that question, as we open the floor, as I said, we have a wealth of knowledge and expertise in our audience, and we would be remiss for not hearing from you. So if you would have some questions or feedback and would raise your hand, and as Alita sees your hand, we will acknowledge your question. And I want to ask Alita, were there any questions that came up in the chat that we can acknowledge now while we're waiting for folks to raise their hands?
I haven't seen any questions in the chat. But if you are raising your hand, if you also just want to put in the chat, because I've got a couple pages of people here, so I may not see you all. But I think we did have a question. Let's see, down. Were you raising?
I couldn't hear her.
I lost her.
Saw someone with a hand raised.
While we're waiting for people to raise their hands, Dr. Womack, would you go back? I did see a question asking if some part of South Carolina was part of the Black Belt, the Southern Black Belt. Would you do a brief overview and kind of provide us with an overview of what precisely is the Southern Black Belt region?
There are various definitions, right? So the father, we can go all the way back to Booker T. Washington and Du Bois. They talk about the Black Belt in their work. We can go into the 1930s with Arthur Rapier. He talks about the Black Belt, all the way down to Ron Wimberly, who really started to define counties. So you have some scholars that will look only at counties that have had a plantation economy from Texas to Virginia. And then, so Ron Wimberly has 100 counties that he has defined as the Black Belt that have significant African-American population, rural, underdevelopment in, usually low skill, low wage manufacturing to start. And we have to think about, these were counties that were traditionally plantation economies that then moved to low skill, low wage manufacturing. Right? So basically the same skill set, but now we're in a knowledge-based economy. And so we don't have the infrastructure needed in order to participate. So we have, pre-civil rights movement, segregation, de jure, de facto segregation in those communities, low educational attainment. So often that's how social scientists define it. But I like to also look at the assets, the opportunities for the creative economy that Tamara talks about. You can't think of American food without the Black Belt. You can't think of American music without the Black Belt. You can't think of American history without the Black Belt. So while social scientists typically define it based on population and census data, we want to expand that definition to look at the region itself from Texas to Virginia and all that we have given this nation, right? And so we want to be developed and be active participants in the growth of the 21st century. That's the Black Belt. I can also give you a list of the counties. Yes, and somebody else, Michael Lewis, is asking something.
Thank you. This has been such an informative session, but how do we interest young people to be involved with these very important issues. And I'm saying that group between the age of 18 to 29, particularly when you talk about air property, you know, and understanding the value of, you know, what they own.
I'd like to take that question if I can.
Sure, go ahead.
All right. And this may be or may not be controversial, but to me, to really address that demographic, marijuana and hemp are your gateway plants to land ownership. I know in Virginia, I've been working closely with VDAC, or Virginia Department of Agriculture, on working to legalize marijuana. And I get about 10 to 15 calls a week from various young people I went to school, high school with and college with, about they have this family land and they hear that hemp or marijuana is about to be legal and want to know what they can do. And I think when you show young people how they can make money from the land, they'll be much more enticed to be a part of the process of owning land. I grew up on a farm or around the farm. My family farm is 110 years old. And I never saw the value of that land until I left and came back 40 years later. And, once you can, for young people, as we get older, going through college and after college, we're looking for a way to support ourselves. And if you can show me a way that I can support myself with my land, it's going to be much more enticing for us to really, to be engaged in it. If you don't show them a way, they're going to look to sell it as soon as they acquire it. So to me, agriculture is the way, and marijuana and hemp are the gateway plants to agriculture, where they can see how they can make money, and then their eyes can open up to other aspects of agriculture. In addition to that, the vocational educational fields related to marijuana, in terms of plumbing, HVAC, electrical work, logistical work, security work, all can support, finance, accounting, bookkeeping. All of those industries are related to agriculture and specifically to marijuana. And we're building out this process right now in Virginia and several other states. So if we look at this plant not as a taboo, but more as a treasure, that we can now grab our children, grab this next generation, hold them with this particular plant and how they can, support themselves and their families through this plant.
Yeah, if I could just add on to that real briefly, I just want to say what Dr. Carter just shared matches what we see and what we've seen over the past at least couple of years in the field as we're trying to mobilize voters and mobilize young voters. There's a couple of issues that have always stand out around, what it is that gets them most interested. One of them has been the issue of police accountability. Obviously, we just had a whole historic summer of protests that to a large extent was led by young people. But the other one is, and there's a connection, obviously, is this issue of hemp and marijuana legalization. And that's just in terms of the policy and the legalization issues, but there's also been interest in a connection to what we're talking about, to what he just shared, which is the economic side of it. So I just want to co-sign +1, all that to what he just said. I'll also add on real briefly to the previous discussion about what the South is. Not that I'm necessarily endorsing this, but Charles Blow in his book that's currently out, The Devil You Know, has an interesting discussion. Speaking, Dr. Carter, of like a reverse migration, right? He has a really interesting discussion in there about what the South is. He actually throws in there Maryland and Delaware. Now that's not what usually fits in my definition of the South, but he raises some interesting points when he raises that, like, are we just talk about the Mason-Dixon line? We just talk about the Confederate states? Are we including some of the border states where there actually was slavery, but they did not join the Confederacy? And he raises some other demographic issues as well. So again, I'm not sure I'm ready to co-sign on Delaware, but he does have an interesting discussion about that, about what the South is and what he's including.
Well, there would be one exception to that, I suppose, and that would be on the Eastern Shore, where we're on the Delmarva Peninsula, and you really can't. We're one contiguous place, and it wasn't that many years ago that Maryland and Virginia were one region that was Virginia. It kind of extended all the way up, and parts of Delaware as well, and so. And the demographics and culture and politics are very similar to ours, and so there are some ways that I would agree with that. Dr. Comer, were you going to say something?
Yes, I want to agree with Michael on the hemp and the marijuana. But also another way that we could reach young people is we have manners. For those who know manners as minorities in agriculture resources, and that minorities in agriculture, natural resources, and yeah, I forgot the rest of it. But that's one of the largest in terms of academics reaching our minority students. That's one of the largest student organizations that we have. And so if we do more connection with them, because I've gone to manners conferences for years and we never talk about, forestry is there talking about jobs, but we never talk about that, once you get the job, what are the things you need to be focusing on? So if we start introducing them to some of this stuff and getting them involved in commissions and letting them know how important that work is along with your career, I think we would do a better job of reaching younger people.
Thank you. And I'm going to introduce you. This is Dr. Marcus Comer, Virginia State University. And would you tell everyone your official role there, your title?
I'm Ag and Natural Resources in Extension and also associate professor. And I run the urban agriculture, the Harding Street Urban Agriculture Center. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We are
Ava,
now.
Just,
yes, sir.
Can I just add a little bit about the getting youth involved? So through our project and the model that we're using is two things: getting youth associated and engaged in career opportunities within the natural resource and conservation arena through STEM programs. But also, we also address in our program the next generation of landowners. That is, a lot of our landowners who are 60, 70, 80 years old, and even got a few 90s in there. We encourage them to bring their next generation with them to our meetings. And what we are starting to see is that this next generation is having an aha moment, is that, oh, I just thought those trees were there just to be standing out there. I didn't realize you could make money from them. And I don't have to move back. I'm in California. I don't have to move back to North Carolina to manage them. Okay, let's talk about this more. So we're seeing more and more of that type of involvement and engagement with the next generation and also with the youth, showing them that agriculture, forestry, conservation is not about being on a tractor. It's not about being in the woods with the ticks and the snakes and all the other wildlife out there. There's research, there's analysis, there's genetics, there's robotics, and there's just so many other opportunities. But we have got to show them that, because if we don't show them that, they're never going to look at it. So just definitely want to plug that in.
Thank you. And it is 5:30. And we are unfortunately out of time. I have had the absolute best time with you this afternoon. I have learned so much. I hope you have as well.
Ava.
Yes.
I'm sorry, I would be remiss. I could not let us end this call without recognizing you and your leadership in pushing this forward and staying on top of this issue of the SCRC and pulling this call together in this incredible panel. So I just really wanted to, give you a shout out and send much love and thanks for everything that you've been doing.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. I appreciate those kind words, and I am so grateful for every one of you who has been part of this long overdue effort. I hope that we will see the Southeast Crescent Regional Commission activated and realized in 2021, and that we can begin to do some of the many powerful things that we have heard today, because our region is greatly in need. And with the pandemic, it is even more critical at this particular time in our history. I'd like to thank all of our panelists, all of those of you who in the audience who participated. I'd like to thank Alicia Kramer, U.S. Endowment. Please raise your hand for hosting this event for us. We are greatly appreciative all across the region for this. And Aspen Institute, all of those of you who are at Aspen Institute who have helped in this effort as well, and who continue to help. Thank you to all of you. Our Southeast Crescent Regional Commission Coalition has a working group of those who participate with us, and that is Dr. Womack, Cliff Albright, that's as I said, Aspen, and it's the Georgia New Project. So thank you to all of those who have helped, and Alan McGregor, who is formerly of U.S. Endowment, who also was very critical in helping us to get this done. What's next? So the next thing that every one of you can do now is become an ambassador across this region for the Southeast Crescent Regional Commission. We sent the letter to the transition team. We know that it's that the administration is aware of it. The Congress just increased the appropriation, so we know it's even a significant issue for them now. We just have to bring it home. I think they hear us. They know we're out here. They see our numbers are growing, and we just have to do what Cliff just said. We have to just stay on top of it. Be the squeaky wheel right now until we can kind of make our own noise in the midst of all of the noise that's going on. So thank you again, and enjoy the rest of your evenings. We will do this again over the course of the year. This is not the last one. Dr. Romack's planning some things. I know SEEP is planning some things. I know I have a couple of congressional offices that are also planning some events coming in the near future. A letter was just sent to the Ag Committee asking the Congress to do a formal hearing on this issue, and I gave them talking points to make that happen. So look for some things to happen. Aspen is planning some things in the future. So look for some events to happen in the very near future. And I hope you will join in on those as well. But most importantly, be an ambassador in your own communities with your own elected officials. Thank you very much for joining us, and have a wonderful evening. Thank you. Thank you so much for that. I appreciate those kind words, and I am so grateful for every one of you who has been part of this long overdue effort. I hope that we will see the Southeast Crescent Regional Commission activated and realized in 2021, and that we can begin to do some of the many powerful things that we have heard today, because our region is greatly in need. And with the pandemic, it is even more critical at this particular time in our history. I'd like to thank all of our panelists, all of those of you who in the audience who participated. I'd like to thank Alicia Kramer at U.S. Endowment. Please raise your hand for hosting this event for us. We are greatly appreciative all across the region for this. And Aspen Institute, all of those of you who are at Aspen Institute who have helped in this effort as well, and who continue to help. Thank you to all of you. Our Southeast Crescent Regional Commission Coalition has a working group of those who participate with us, and that is Dr. Womack, Cliff Albright, that's as I said, Aspen, and it's the Georgia New Project. So thank you to all of those who have helped, and Alan McGregor, who is formerly of U.S. Endowment, who also was very critical in helping us to get this done. What's next? So the next thing that every one of you can do now is become an ambassador across this region for the Southeast Crescent Regional Commission. We sent the letter to the transition team. We know that it's that the administration is aware of it. The Congress just increased the appropriation, so we know it's even a significant issue for them now. We just have to bring it home. I think they hear us. They know we're out here. They see our numbers are growing, and we just have to do what Cliff just said. We have to just stay on top of it. Be the squeaky wheel right now until we can kind of make our own noise in the midst of all of the noise that's going on. So thank you again, and enjoy the rest of your evenings. We will do this again over the course of the year. This is not the last one. Dr. Romack's planning some things. I know SEEP is planning some things. I know I have a couple of congressional offices that are also planning some events coming in the near future. A letter was just sent to the Ag Committee asking the Congress to do a formal hearing on this issue, and I gave them talking points to make that happen. So look for some things to happen. Aspen is planning some things in the future. So look for some events to happen in the very near future. And I hope you will join in on those as well. But most importantly, be an ambassador in your own communities with your own elected officials. Thank you very much for joining us and have a wonderful evening.